Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. My name is Farrell Janab, and I'm the director of the Kansas Studies Institute, which the Institute exists to promote appreciation and understanding for Kansas. And I think we all know that Johnson County is a little bit different from the rest of the part of the state, so we want to foster a sense of place and pride for the students who come here from Johnson County to understand where they're from, and also to forge connections with the rest of the state. So that's why we're here. I think we are one of 2 regional studies programs in the country, community colleges that have regional studies programs. So I'm very proud of that. And for the last 7 years, we've had somebody come and speak for the Kansas Lecture Series. That would include Wes Jackson, who came and spoke about his work with the Land Institute, Henry Fortunato, who's here in the audience tonight, who talked about his walk across Kansas. Last year we had Karen Miriam Goldberg and Stephen Locke, who spoke about tornadoes and weather in Kansas. So we've had some interesting lectures. Tonight we have Jim Hoy. Jim he grew up on a small ranch near Cassidy, Kansas, amid horses and cattle in the Flint Hills. And the family spans more than 6 generations. And as he says, it reflects his roots as deep as those of blue stem grass in the black soil bottomland. He has served as a professor of English at Emporia State University. He got his BS from K-State in 1965, MA from Emporia State in 65, and then a PhD from University of Columbia in 1970. And he served as chair of the English department for 10 years until 1990. After 45 years, he retired last year, teaching in December 2014, and he also is the director of the Center for Great Plains Studies at ESU. His interests include medieval and Renaissance English literature, Western American literature, American Outback folk life and literature, and Great Plains folklore. He's published over 150 articles, both scholarly and journalistic, and is the author, co-author, or editor of 17 books, most of them about the folk life of ranching. He was appointed to the Board of Trustees of the American Folklife Center in 1996, where he served. He's also served as president of the Kansas Historical Society and the American Association of Australian Studies. In 2004, he was inducted into the Kansas Cowboy Hall of Fame. And last year, the Kansas Native Sons and Daughters named him the Kansan of the Year. 2016 Kansan of the Year. So alongside all of that, I would say he's just a really great person, a loving grandfather, father, and husband. And I'm proud and honored to introduce my father, Jim Hoy, tonight to speak about.
Thanks, Carol. Well, it's very nice to be asked to give the talk here, the Kansas Lecture Series? Is that what it is? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to be here, and I think my daughter does a really good job at Johnson County Community College. Anyway, the title of my talk is What is a Kansan? A Perspective Through the Eyes of a Folklorist. I think I have some authority to speak about what is a Kansan. In about 6 weeks, I've lived here 77 years, except for the 4 that I spent at Missouri getting a PhD. And I taught 45 years, as Farrell said, at Emporia State University, and taught dozens of folklore classes during that time. So I have some expertise in that area as well. I developed a class called Flint Hills Folk Life, which was a lot of fun to teach. About 10 years into my teaching career, I decided it was I lost that hard-nosed edge that just out of graduate school instructors had, and thought, what the heck? I might as well have fun teaching, and I might as well make it fun for the students. If they don't want to learn, they'll flunk, and it's their own fault, so I'll just try to make it a fun thing, and I have. But that Flint Hills Folk Life class was really good, and we would spend, it was a weekend intensive class, or else a summer school class, and we'd spend some time in the classroom, and then I would check out a university minivan and we'd drive around the hills from the north to the south, visiting the local historical societies and visiting ranches, farms, talking to men and women who'd lived in the Flint Hills a while. And I learned a lot from that because I had my students read a newspaper from the Flint Hills that was at least 100 years old and kind of analyze what was in it. I also made them interview someone from the Flint Hills. And one of them turned up a newspaper account that there was a place near, well, this gets into part of my topic. Let me make a note here. I'll bring that up at the appropriate time. Let's see if I can find it. There we go, yeah. Nice to be writing my talk while I'm giving it, right? Okay, anyway, what is folklore? Folklore is literally the learning, the lore of the people, of the folk. Many people associate folklore with something that's not true. Oh, it's just an old wives' tale. Oh, that's just folklore. And the point is that folklore can be true, it can be false, but it's always valid. Whether it's false or not, it's valid because it's what people think and people believe. And you can also think of folklore as informal education. We have set up institutions in our society like the one we're in right now. Schools are the most notable of those, but also churches, libraries, museums, institutions set up to pass knowledge on to future generations so they can survive in our society in a formal setting and formally. But we also have informal modes of education. If you'll think back to your grade school days, you learned a lot at recess that they didn't teach in the classroom. You learned a lot on the school bus they didn't teach in the classroom. You went home and told your mother about some of the things you learned and probably got your mouth washed out with soap for doing it. But there are a certain body of knowledge that we think is important to pass on, but in that informal kind of fashion. So folklore it's a very interesting thing to study. It's how members of a particular group, it could be an occupational group, it could be an ethnic group, it could be a regional group, in this case Kansas, it's how they see the world, what they think, how they do things, what they believe, in particular, what they believe about themselves. So I want to examine the question of what is a Kansan by looking through the lens of folklore. The view of people from outside the state is that Kansans are country bumpkin farmers. Despite the fact that our rural population has been declining precipitously for the past 50 years or more, most of the people in Kansas live in cities, the vast majority, in probably 3 or 4 big cities. And we're in one of the areas right now. The rest of the state refers to Johnson County as one urban area, which I suppose it is, but many different little towns in here, cities. But the point is that outsiders see us as these farmers kind of, if not ignorant, at least kind of not very whippy, all that. But if you introduce yourself as a Kansan to someone outside the state or outside the country, often the response you'll get is, "Oh, how's Dorothy?" Yeah, Wizard of Oz is how they know Kansas. Yeah. Or they'll remind you of a study they read a few years ago that scientifically proved that Kansas was flatter than a pancake. Remember when that came out? Yeah. Or we'll hear something patronizing about flyover country. Well, we are patronized and we're put down. We're the butt of jokes. Why is it so windy in Oklahoma? Because Texas blows and Kansas sucks. Instead of righteous indignation, when we hear such things, however, we often kind of figuratively at least duck our heads, mumble a little, quietly acquiesce. We do have a good sense of humor, but it's often self-deprecating. Nor do we get the credit that we should for many things. I'll give you 2 examples. Let's take our state song, which is widely known throughout the world. One of my colleagues at Emporia State was in St. Petersburg, Russia, and he heard a little street ensemble, 3 or 4 people playing instruments around the corner. He walked around the corner. They were playing Home on the Range. Yeah, it's a very popular song. And a few decades back, a musician, pretty well-known musician named David Guion, died. He was in Texan. And he was important enough that Newsweek ran an obituary on him. And in that obituary, they credited him with writing Home on the Range. For the first and so far the last time in my life that I have felt compelled to write a letter to an editor complaining about something, I wrote the editors of Newsweek telling them that David Guion did not write Home on the Range. And I did get a response. They said, well, he wrote the most popular, the most well-known arrangement of the song. Well, an arrangement's not the song, in my opinion. It was written, as I hope most of you know, in Kansas by a Kansan, Brewster Higley, way out there in the central part of the state, Smith County, and the music written by another Kansan in the area, Dan Kelly. Very popular at the barn dances and things in the area. Cowboys riding through with trail herds picked up that song and carried it all over the country. There are many different versions of that song. Big hassle over the copyright, but I think is in the teens or 20s, finally settled in favor of Brewster Higley. So it was the editors of Newsweek, as I say, they wrote back and they acknowledged that Guion was not the author, but the most, arranged the most popular arrangement, but they did not publish a retraction in Newsweek, as they should have. Okay. Now, another thing that Kansas don't get credit for as much as they should, the cowboy boot. I don't know if you know this or not, but the very first pair of cowboy boots, recognizable as cowboy boots, not as the military-style boot that drovers wore back in the 1860s and 70s, which had a broad, flat toe and a low, flat heel, and a stovepipe top. But it was made just down the road in Olathe, Kansas in 1875 in the shop of Charles Heyer. Charles Heyer taught students at the School for the Deaf, Kansas School for the Deaf, and he taught them a trade that they could use for which they didn't need their hearing. We also had this little shoe repair making shop there on the street there in Olathe. And in 1875, a Colorado cowboy, drover, who had been in Kansas City with cattle, was on his way home, and he stopped at Heyer's shop, and he walked in and says, "Can you make me a different kind of boot than these military boots I'm wearing? And I want one with a pointed toe that'll slip into a stirrup easily. I want one with a high slanted heel that'll hold a spur if the horse starts to pitch with me. Scallop in the top, stick my pant legs in there easier. Can you do that?" Heyer said, "Sure," and he did. That was 1875. It was 4 more years, 1879, before a St. Louis cobbler, bootmaker, moved from St. Louis to Spanish Fort, Texas, and started making cowboy boots there. So we are the home of the cowboy boot. About 20, maybe over 20 years ago, Kansas Museum of History in Topeka mounted a special exhibit. And it was about the history of the cowboy boot and famous Kansas bootmakers. Among the many visitors to that exhibit was a Texan who was irate to think that these wheat farming Kansans were claiming to be the home of the cowboy boot. And he complained rather loudly, I guess, and some of the people there at the museum had heard him, and they went and talked to him, and they explained to him that these drovers got paid $1 a day, pretty good wages for those days. But of course, they were only working 3, 4, 5 months a year. But it was pretty good pay, but they didn't get a penny of it till they got to the end of the trail. And if you didn't get money from them here, now these guys average probably is maybe 20 years or 19 years of age, and they are young men when their testosterone is at its peak in the company of 10 or 12 other young men for months at a time. Believe me, when they hit a town, probably the first thing they did was get their haircut and get a bath, maybe buy some new clothes. They're tired of wearing the same clothing they'd worn for 3, 4, 5 months in a row. But then they would hit the gambling dens. They'd hit the dance halls, which could be kind of considered a euphemism in some instances. And they hit the dance halls, the saloons and the gambling dens. And if you didn't want to get money from them, if you didn't get it from them here, they probably wouldn't have any when they got back home to Texas or Iowa or Missouri or other parts of Kansas, wherever they came from. And this Texan says, well, it makes sense to me. I understand that. But he says, I always thought the old Chisholm Trail ran up to Abilene. And the docents at the museum looked kind of puzzled and said, well, yeah, it did. And this Texan says, well, Abilene's in Texas. He had no idea that Abilene, Kansas was the cow town, and he had no idea that Abilene, Texas was founded by 2 men from Abilene, Kansas who named it after their hometown. At any rate, to get back to my topic, what does a folklorist look for? We look for the ordinary and the extraordinary. We look for the extraordinary and the ordinary. We look at the lives of common people and what they do, what they believe, how they do things, how they think. Good sources for this information can be found in typical conversational topics. It can be found in the folk songs they sing. Of course, folk songs don't really exist anymore because once recordings, radio, television, and now the things that the kids stick in their ears took over, not many people sit around a campfire and sort of make up songs and whatever, but they did back then. The folk songs and the stories that people tell. Myths, legends, tales, folk tales. To a folklorist, myth is folk religion. A myth is a story that might not deal with the divine, but it has it contains deep truths that are held by those people, by those folk, that group that tells that myth. Deep truths. The legends are folk history. They're told for truth. They're received as truth from the people telling them. Most often, they are founded in something based in something that really happened, but over the years, that event has gained other elements that maybe magnify it a little, make it a little more interesting, make it a little more, in some cases, hard to believe, I suppose, but it's history, folk history. And tales told by the teller knows they're not true, they're fiction. And the hearers, most of the time, know they're not true, too, also. Jokes are little folk tales. And there are others as well. But like, how hot is it this summer? Well, it was so hot that the corn started popping in the field. And the geese flying over saw it and thought it was snow and froze to death. You know, stuff like that, kind of silly stuff, but that's just for fun, yeah. But a very popular topic in Kansas conversation is the weather, of course. It's not in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, because in many parts of the world the weather's the same pretty much year-round. Maybe you have a rainy season, and when the rainy season starts, it rains. When it stops, it stops. Otherwise, it's about the same temperature year-round, all that. But not in Kansas. Our weather is fickle, it can be extreme, and it's an important factor in our lives, particularly in rural lives. Think of, you walked in here tonight, I bet some of you didn't even wear a jacket. I see some people in short-sleeved shirts. It's the 10th of November, for heaven's sake. We should have ice that thick by now. But I don't know. What do we say? You don't like the weather in Kansas? Wait a day. Wait an hour sometimes. It'll change. It will. Jenny Chin, who is the director of the Kansas State Historical Society, came to Kansas from California, 20, 30 years ago, 20 years, 5, I guess, as the state folklorist. And she was just fascinated, people talking about the weather all the time. because where she came from, Southern California, they didn't. But the thing that really caught her attention, which as a native Kansan I didn't think of, was she said, whatever the weather is, whatever it is outside, people say, but that's not normal. Well, isn't that right? It's either hotter than normal, colder than normal. Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me of, this would be possibly a legend, more likely a folk tale, of the old Kansas farmer who retired, and his kids, of course, had gone to college and moved off doing other jobs and things, and he's up there getting close to 80, maybe past it, and lived on that farm his whole life and worked hard. He's out there every morning milking the cows, slopping the hogs, in the winter breaking ice for his cows, and in the summer sweating under that hot sun. And his daughter said to him, my gosh, you're over 80 and your mother deserves a little rest in her life. Why don't you move out here to California? It's beautiful out here. It's wonderful. So he sells the farm, they move out to California. And it is wonderful. My gosh, shirt sleeve weather every day. It's just great. But about the second year there, he gets up one morning and walks out in the backyard and he looks at the sky and says, oh hell, another damn beautiful day. Missed that variety. Yeah. Myth. I'm going to give you two myths. The one I jotted a note on, Deadmans Hollow. Deadmans Hollow is in a little draw about 5 miles south of my hometown of Cassidy. Turnpike runs right through it. And they don't have a sign there saying Deadman's Hollow, which they should have. But I'd heard about Deadman's Hollow all the time I was growing up. When I worked for a couple of months on the Turnpike maintenance crew when I first got out of college, some of the old guys around there that worked on there would tell me, take that truck down about a mile past Deadman's Hollow and pick up whatever, They'd use it as kind of giving directions. Well, what I'd heard about Deadman's Hollow was that a man and a wife were driving a covered wagon through the countryside. He stopped there there were two men and a woman, a husband and wife and another man in this covered wagon, and they stopped there to make camp at this little draw there with two big cottonwood trees growing, a little water running down the stream. And during the night, the husband shows up at a farmhouse about a half mile away and asks to be taken in. They turn him away. He goes back to the camp. They last see him walking back toward that campfire. Next day, the wagon pulls out, disappears. A couple of weeks later, the farmer that had turned him away is out hunting. His dogs start barking, digging up the ground, and uncover the body of the man the husband, who'd gone for help. The man who was with him and his wife, I guess, had joined together and killed him. That's a story I heard growing up. One of the students in one of those Flint Hills Folk Life classes, reading one of those 100-year-old plus newspapers, describing what was in it, had an account of a trial down in El Dorado, the county seat. And as I read what she was writing about it, I thought, that's Deadman's Hollow. And it was. And so I was able to put the legend here and the facts here. And the facts were there were two men and a boy in that covered wagon, no woman. Nothing about the guy going to a farmhouse and asking to be taken in. But a week or so later, after the wagon had moved on, the farmer had lived nearby out hunting, and his dogs barked and scratched and uncovered the body. Now, the sheriff in Butler County must have been a pretty darn good detective, because he traced down who was in that wagon, the other person in that wagon, and goes up to, came down from, I think it was Bismarck, Dakota Territory. It wasn't even the state yet. It goes down, goes up there to Bismarck, and no, it goes to Iowa, because it had come from Bismarck, but then the other guy who killed the husband and had taken that son, 10 or 12-year-old kid, over to the railroad in Newton and said, tell people this is your name, and put him on a train back to some relatives. And then he and the wife get together and they move off to Iowa to live happily ever after, except the Butler County Sheriff shows up at the door and arrests him for that. Tried to remove identification on it, buddy, but I guess they couldn't. Interesting synopsis of the trial. The coroner said he was struck in the head by a shovel, which killed him instantly, and then he was shot, which killed him.
Ooh.
One of them killed him, whether it was the shovel or the bullet, but both of them apparently killed him, according to the coroner. At any rate, they found out that this guy and the wife, he was a distant cousin, I think, of the wife, fourth, fifth, sixth, something like that. Anyway, there was some evidence at the trial that the husband, the dead husband, was an abusive man and abused the wife. We have no idea what it was that triggered the death, the murder, whether the guy that ended up married to her really loved her, and when he found out, or something was said and he found out about the abuse, it angered him so much, or whether they'd planned that he'd be killed. Apparently the wife wasn't implicated in it because she was never brought up for trial, but the 2 or 3 newspapers there in El Dorado covered it, and one of them had a cub reporter. It's his first assignment, was to go out and cover this trial, and this guy wrote purple prose, decided that this man was guilty, and there was no pretense at realistic, non-partisan journalism in this. He had decided this guy's guilty, and he, in this very lurid prose, made him appear guilty. And he was found guilty. And as this man was led out of the courtroom, he turned and pointed to that young reporter and said, "You're the reason they found me guilty." That young man was, on his first newspaper assignment, was William Allen White. Later won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for his writing, his journalism. He was honing his craft, I guess, on this murder trial. Well, that's one legend. I want to tell you another. That's a legend, yeah. I want to back up and talk about a myth now. I don't know too many myths from Kansas, but this is one. I don't think they do this anymore, but when I was in school, grade school, we learned about a little Mennonite girl named Anna Bartman. They lived in the Ukraine of Russia. They were preparing to immigrate to Kansas. Her father had done some study, and he thought that the soil, that the climate in Kansas would be perfect for the kind of wheat they grew there in Russia. Hard red winter wheat. They call it turkey red wheat. And he sends his little 10-year-old daughter, out to the granary to fill 2 big jars full of seed wheat. Now, that'd be pretty easy to scoop that wheat up and pour it in those jugs. It wouldn't take very long, 5 minutes, you'd have it done. But he told her, "I don't want you doing that. I want you to just sort through that wheat and find the plumpest, fattest kernels you can and put them in those jars." So here this little girl is in that dusty, dirty granary, rats and mice running around, bugs and spiders everywhere, day after day out there sorting through that and picking out those big kernels of wheat until she had those 2 jugs filled. She had much rather been playing with her sisters or mother or helping her mother in the house or something, but no, her father told her to do that, so she did it. They come to Kansas, he plants that wheat, and because of that, we switched from spring wheat to winter wheat, this hard red winter wheat from Russia, and Kansas becomes the wheat state. If Kansas were an independent nation, we'd be the 12th largest wheat producer in the world. It was just the perfect thing for our climate. Now, there may well have been a little girl named Anna Bartman. She may well have had to fill those 2 jars, 1 kernel at a time, but you're not going to plant thousands of acres of wheat in Kansas within that short time it took for Kansas to become a major wheat producer from 2 jars of wheat. That might have really happened, but the point is a Mennonite businessman from Newton named Bernard Workentine imported seed wheat by the boatload and spread it around, and boy, within a year or 2, we had switched from that hard red winter wheat to switched from that spring wheat, which you plant in February, to hard red winter wheat, which you plant in the fall and harvest in the summer. Now, what makes that story a myth? It may or may not be true, but it contains a deep, deep truth about Kansas and Kansans. We do our jobs that we're asked to do. We don't expect to get rich quick. We're not big plungers. We don't gamble. We're not like Texans that are just, want to get rich in a hurry, and so they'll have an oil well dug on their place, and that happens for them. We're not like other states where we expect to do our job. We hope to be rewarded for it, to make a good living, but it's not necessarily going to happen quickly. And if we don't be properly rewarded for it, well, we kind of shrug our shoulders and knuckle down a little harder and go ahead and do our jobs. Yeah, it contains that deep element of truth about what Kansans are like. I'm going to tell you a folk tale from Kansas. I have this, I think it's the last chapter in my book, Flint Hills Cowboys. And it's the only, I mentioned that folk tale earlier about the popcorn and, field corn popping as popcorn and so on. But when I was researching that Flint Hills Cowboys book, I interviewed a lot of men and women who had lived in the hills for ages and got a lot of good stories, but only one folk tale. Unlike the Ozarks, Vance Randolph, the famous folklorist of the Ozarks, wrote a book called We Always Lie to Strangers. In the Flint Hills, we don't lie to strangers. We don't necessarily tell them anything unless they ask. We don't tell them more than they ask, but we don't lie to them, usually. But let me tell you this story that this man told me. He is in his 80s, and his family had come to northeast Butler County back in, I suppose, the 1880s, something like that. They came from Indiana, I think he said, in a covered wagon, and they were camping along Duracan Creek, which is about 6-7 miles south of my home there at Cassidy. They're camping there, and they've been camped there for 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. And I think he said it was his grandfather. He has a grandfather. This guy's 80-some. His grandfather gets up one morning and crawls out of the tent, stretching and yawning. It's just getting daybreak, and looks around and kind of looking around, and here comes a flock of geese sitting down on Walnut River. They're camped right where the Duracan Creek runs into the Walnut River. They're right in that little V area just above that the junction. And he sees these geese sitting down in the Walnut River. And man, he is hungry for something besides squirrel and rabbit. They've been eating that for weeks on the trail and camped there. So he sneaks back into the tent. The rest of the family's asleep. He gets his father's 10-gauge, double-barrel, muzzle-loading shotgun, checks it to make sure it's primed and loaded with birdshot there, and he crawls back out of the tent, and he starts crawling down to the river, the Walnut. That's the fall of the year, and it's a year like this one. You should see the grass in the Flint Hills this year. It's the best seed year we've had in 30 years, I think. The big blue stems up like that, the little blue stems like that, the Indian grass up here is just thick. It's everywhere. Well, that's the way it was down in that bottom land between the Duracan and the Walnut. And he's crawling down there, dragging that gun. He's crawling on hands and knees. He doesn't want to, he's hidden. If he'd stand up, his head would show a little, but he didn't want to scare those geese, so he's crawling down there on his hands and knees, dragging that gun along with him. And just as he gets about close enough to rear up and shoot him a goose, a flock of ducks sit down in Duracan Creek. Now, what's he want to eat? Roast duck or roast goose? He doesn't have long to think because all of a sudden he hears a terrifying noise. He looks up ahead of him from closer, half of the distance from me to you is a huge timber rattlesnake rattling away. He jerks that gun up and lets him have both barrels. Unbeknownst to him, those barrels have got filled with grass seed, dragging that along with him down there, and the gun explodes. Like this metal goes flying off in both directions. And he looks up, the geese are flying off, the ducks are flying off, but on the Walnut are half a dozen dead geese, and on the Duracan are half a dozen dead ducks. and I bit. I said, "What happened to the snake?" He said, "Oh, he got speared by the ramrod." Yeah. That's the point of a lot of folk tales. They try to get you there. Well, I think what I'll do now, I mentioned folk songs earlier, so let's, I'll give you a few examples of some folk songs that either originated in Kansas or were brought to Kansas. Get my vehicle over here. Okay, this first song is actually called "In Kansas." Oh, they chawed tobacco thin in Kansas. They chaw tobacco thin in Kansas. They chaw tobacco thin and it dribbles down their chin and they lick it up again in Kansas. The potatoes, they grow small in Kansas. Potatoes, they grow small in Kansas. Potatoes, they grow small and they dig 'em in the fall and they eat 'em, hides and all in Kansas. They say that drink's a sin in Kansas. They say that drink's a sin in Kansas. They say that drink's a sin, so they guzzle all they can and they throw it up again in Kansas. Come all who want to roam to Kansas. Come all who want to roam to Kansas. Come all who want to roam and seek yourself a home and be happy with your doom in Kansas. Thank you. Okay, most of these songs are from that pioneer era because, as I said, once radio and other electronic means came in, folk songs kind of died away. It's basically creating folk songs. And this one is kind of a male chauvinist pig song. I am a sternal bachelor, my age is 44. I do declare I'll never live with women anymore. Have a stove, it's worth 10 cents, a table worth 15. I cook my food in an oyster can, I keep my skillet clean. Oh, little sod shanty built for me, for I'm a sternal bachelor from matrimony free. When I come home at night, I smile and walk right in. I never hear a voice call out, I say, where have you been? On a cold and stormy night in my cozy little shack, I sing my songs and think my thoughts with no one to talk back. Oh, little sod shanty built for me, for I'm a sternal bachelor from matrimony free. I go to bed whenever I please, I get up just the same. I wash my socks 3 times a year with no one to complain. At night when I'm in peaceful sleep, my snores can do no harm. I never have to walk the floor with a baby in my arms. Oh, little sod shanty built for me, for I'm a sternal bachelor from matrimony free. I live upon a homestead clean from women I am hid. I do not have to dress a wife or take care of a kid. And when I die and go to heaven, as all good bachelors do, I will not have to fret for fear my wife's gonna get there too. Oh, little sod shanty built for me, for I'm a sternal bachelor from matrimony free. A bit of a male chauvinist song, so let's counter that with one song called Kansas Boys, which also it came to Kansas, and it started out, I don't know for sure, but there's the Kentuckian Boys, there's the Texian Boys version. This is the Kansas Boys version. Come all young girls, pay attention to my noise. Don't fall in love with the Kansas boys, for if you do, your fortune it will be. Johnny cake and antelope is all you'll see. Johnny cake and antelope is all you'll see. They'll take you out to a jet black hill, take you there so much against your will, leave you there to perish on the plains, for that is the way with the Kansas rain. That is the way with the Kansas range. When they get hungry and go to bake bread, they kindle a fire as high as your head, rake around the ashes and in they throw. The name they call it is the doughboy's dough. The name they call it is the doughboy's dough. When they go to milk, they milk in a gourd, heave it in a corner and cover it with a board. Some get plenty and some get none. That is the way with the Kansas run. That is the way with the Kansas run. When they go to meeting, the clothes that they wear is an old gray coat all picked and bare, an old white hat more whim than brown, crown, a pair of cotton socks they wore the week around, a pair of cotton socks they wore the week around. When they go to farming, you needn't be alarmed. In February they plant their corn. The way they tend it, I'll tell you now. A Texas pony and a grasshopper plow. A Texas pony and a grasshopper plow. When they come a-courtin', they take along a chair. The first thing they say is, has your daddy killed a bear? The second thing they say when they sit down is, Madam, your Johnny cake is bacon brown. Madam, your Johnny cake is bacon brown. Johnny cake is cornbread, and cornmeal was the cheapest, most common kind of material to make from which to make something like bread. Wheat flour was too expensive or too rare. And this song, there's several interesting verses in it. When they go to courting, they say, has your daddy killed a bear? What are they doing, testing out how tough the father is or something? I'm not sure. But that one verse there, when they go to farming, in February they plant the corn. This tells us this song came to Kansas before the Mennonites came and brought that winter wheat with them. Yeah. You can learn some interesting things from folk songs like that. Okay, there's a song that definitely originated in Kansas called Kansas Land. It traveled all the way up and down the plains. There's a Nebraska land, there's a Texas, Oklahoma version, Dakota land. But this is the original. Oops, if I can get right here. I've reached the land of corn and wheat, of pumpkin pies and potato sweet. Oops, I'm in the wrong key, no wonder. I reached the land of corn and wheat, of pumpkin pies and potato sweet. I bought my land from Uncle Sam, and now I'm happy as a clam. Oh, Kansas land, sweet Kansas land, as on the highest hill I stand. I look the pleasant landscape o'er, for acres broad I'll sigh no more, till Gabriel's trump in loud command says I must leave my Kansas land. My chickens, they are Plymouth Rock, my horses Clydesdale, Norman stock, my cattle Durham very fine, and Poland, China are my swine. Oh, Kansas land, sweet Kansas land, as on the highest hill I stand. I look the pleasant landscape o'er, for acres broad I'll sigh no more, till Gabriel's trump in loud command says I must leave my Kansas land. When first I came to get my claim, my neighbors, they were far apart, but now there's one on every claim, and sometimes three all want the same. Oh, Kansas land, sweet Kansas land, as on the highest hill I stand. I look the pleasant landscape o'er, for acres broad I'll sigh no more, till Gabriel's trump in loud command says I must leave my Kansas land. Now that's the good version. That's in the good times. That's when the weather cooperates and everything else. Another one of the Kansas myths was rain follows the plow. Kansas, its whole Central Plains, of course, was called the Great American Desert. But then after the Civil War, the railroads are going through here. They want settlers out here. The government's trying to get people out here. So what do you do when you've called this place a Great American Desert for a couple of centuries? You change the myth. And they start calling it the Garden of the World. And rain follows the plow. Why don't we have enough rain out here in the plains? Because it's not farmed, it's grass. But if you would farm it, turn that soil over, expose the dirt to the skies, the respiration is going to change, and more water will go up into the heavens, and more water will fall back down as rain. That was the theory. And it worked. I think this is in the early 1880s. I was given a copy of a diary from Sherman County. That's where Goodland is. And this diary runs from about April through August. In those 5-6 months, the main thing this farmer did, as you might expect, was record rainfall. And he recorded something like 23 or 24 inches of rain in those 5-6 months in a county in the state that usually gets about 16 inches a year. It must have seemed indeed like rain followed the plow. But we're talking averages. And I remember a few years ago I was doing a program down in Elkhart. Now Elkhart's on the Oklahoma border, about 5 or 6 miles from Colorado. It's as far in southwest Kansas as you can get almost. And they were in the middle of a drought as usual down there. And I asked one of the men there, I said, what's the average rainfall here? And he said, it's 17 inches a year. And you ought to be here the night we get it. So, what happened in those years when the rain didn't follow the plow? You get a verse like this. I've reached the land, I've reached the land of drought and heat, where nothing grows for me to eat. The wind doth blow with scorching heat, but Kansas land cannot be beat. Oh, Kansas land, sweet Kansas land, as on the highest hill I stand. I look away across the plains, I wonder why it never rains, till Gabriel doth his trumpet sound, and says the rain's just gone around. Which it does out there. Well, there's no other, according to Guy Logsdon, the Oklahoma State folklorist, there's no other occupational group in the country that made up more poems and songs than cowboys. Farmers did, soldiers did, fishermen did, prospectors did, coal miners did, railroaders did, all made up poems and songs, but none made up as many as the cowboy. And he says, for a good reason. Cowboys out there in the wide open spaces in the middle of nature. Nature's always been an inspiration for poets. Cowboys have exciting lives, bucking horses, wild steers, so they got exciting things to write about. And they have the leisure and the breath left in them at the end of the day to write poems and sing songs. If you think about John Henry, the guy that built all those railroads, John Henry is swinging a 9-pound hammer 12 hours a day. Man, after he eats his supper around the campfire, he's going to go to sleep as soon as he can. Those cowboys driving those cattle up the trail from Texas, after they get up before daylight, they don't get to bed till after dark, but after they eat their supper around the chuck wagon, they're not going to go to sleep right away usually. They're going to sit around and tell stories. And the thing about a story is, if you tell it more than once, people kind of quit listening to it. But if you can put that story into verse, they'll listen to it more often. And if you can put that verse into song, they'll listen to it every night. Besides, the horse has been doing the heavy work. So the cowboy has a little bit of energy left at the end of the day, sitting around a campfire to tell stories and sing songs. So I got a couple of songs. One of them, a contemporary cowboy song based on a folk song. This is written by the Gillette brothers down there in Texas, and they based it on a British sea fisherman ballad called Shoals of Herring. And, but they call it North to Kansas, about the cattle drives. Remember once KTWU is on their 50th anniversary, I think, over there in Lawrence, had a program, and they asked me to do something there, and I sang this song, and a man and his girlfriend came in after, and she said, "This guy wants to tell you something." He says, "That song is Shoals of Herring." He was British, and he knew that song from Britain as Shoals of Herring. But the Gillette brothers turned it into this one. It was a fine and a pleasant day. We left Texas and the sun was glaring, just a young cowboy with a string of horses, off to drive the long horse north to Kansas. I'm going to try a different key here. Oh, the work was hard and the hours were long, and the weather, oh, it took some bearing. Oh, but we were young and we had our fun as we drove the Longhorns north to Kansas. Well, we crossed the Red and the Arkansas, and the cookie, he was always swearing, and I used to sleep sitting in my saddle, and I'd dream about the herd in Kansas. Through the driving rain and the blowing wind, just to earn our daily bread, you're daring. Left my Texas home, crossed those swollen rivers, for to drive the Longhorns north to Kansas. Now you're riding drag and you're eating dust, but you do your job without complaining. Take a turn at watch with the other fellas as you drive the Longhorns north to Kansas. We arrived at Kansas in the month of June, and for Abilene we took our bearing, with 2,000 head of those rangy cattle that were driven all the way to Kansas. Now I earned my keep and I paid my way, and I earned the spurs that I was wearing, rode 1,000 miles, took all kinds of chances as we drove the Longhorns north to Kansas. Okay? So that's kind of a contemporary song. I guess you wouldn't really call it quite a folk song, but its origin was like a folk song, because people would take music that they already heard or a song they'd already heard, and they would adapt it to local conditions, which is what happened to this one. So we'll play Guess That Tune. 2 notes, 2 words. What song is this? As I... What? One person at a time. Nobody? Streets of Laredo. That's not how it started. It actually goes back to Ireland, about the time of the American Revolution, where it's called The Unfortunate Rake, which goes back to an earlier Irish ballad called the Bard of Armagh. But it crosses the Irish Sea, and in England, this young soldier dying, the unfortunate rake, dying of the ravages of venereal disease. It crosses the Irish Sea to England, where the main character becomes a sailor. It crosses the Atlantic Ocean, where the main character becomes a young woman dying of an unspecified illness. The Cowboys called it the Bad Girls Lament. I think they knew what she did, what her illness was. But we were squeamish way back then, believe it or not. Anyway, in 1876, a young cowboy who'd come to Kansas from Iowa at age 16 or 17 in 1870. He was, and became a cowboy a year or so later, and he was herding cattle, wintering cattle, on the Indian Territory, Kansas line southwest of Medicine Lodge in the winter of 1875-76. And he wrote his memoirs in 1886. And in his memoirs, he noted that all the boys around camp, he said, were singing the song about the bad girl. He said, I had always tried to write poems, so I decided to make it about the cowboy. And I made the main character a ranger. By ranger, he did not mean a lawman, a Texas Ranger. He meant someone who rides the range, a cowboy. So he says, I made the main character a ranger, and I set it at Big Tom Sherman's bar room out in Dodge City. And he said that the boys around camp liked my song, and they started singing it. That spring, we took our cattle up to Wichita to ship out. Wichita was still a cow town at that point. And he said, when you do that, you've got several herds grazing around, and you leave a bare skeleton crew with the cattle, and the others would go visit chuck wagons and talk to the other cowboys, things like that. Anyway, he said, later on that summer, I heard my song being sung all the way up and down the range. Those Texas cowboys picked it up, and they moved it 1,000 miles south to the Rio Grande, and it became the Streets of Laredo. But it started out as what Frank Maynard, the man that wrote it, called the Dying Cowboy. As I rode down by Tom Sherman's barroom, Tom Sherman's barroom so early one day, oh, there I espied a handsome young ranger, wrapped in white linen and cold as the clay. I see by your outfit that you are a ranger, the words that he said as I went riding by. Come sit down beside me and hear my sad story, for I'm shot through the breast and I know I must die. So muffle the drums and play the dead marches and play the dead march as you carry me along. Take me to the churchyard and lay the sod o'er me, for I'm a young ranger and I know I've done wrong. A couple other verses in there. I'll go ahead to the last one here. Go now and bring me a cup of cold water to bathe my flushed temples, the poor fella said. But ere I returned, his spirit had left him, had gone to its giver, the ranger was dead. So we muffled the drums, we played the dead marches, we bitterly wept as we bore him along. For we all love the ranger, so brave and so handsome. We all loved our comrade, although he'd done wrong. I suppose about 25 years ago, I read a paper for the Texas Folklore Society that was called The Contributions of Kansas to the Cowboy. And I told them about how the cowboy came into existence, how he rose out of the dust of the old Chisholm Trail, bringing us cattle from Texas, where they have plenty of cattle, up to Kansas, where the markets were and the railroad shipping areas were, and about how not only that, but where the grass was, because Texas lots of times in the middle of a 3 or 4 year drought, there's not that much grass, but there is up here. Indian Territory and Kansas that eat grass. Told them about the markets, people buying steers to take them on to the Indian reservations in the Dakotas and so on. I told them about how the cowboy boot was a Kansas invention. John B. Stetson got the idea for the Stetson hat walking across Kansas territory to the gold fields of Kansas back in 1858, before Kansas cut off that part of the state, gave it to Colorado. And about, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, the first and only woman I know of that worked as a trail hand was a girl, 17-year-old girl from Caldwell, Kansas. So the first cowgirl was from Kansas. I got away with all that, but when I told them that the Streets of Laredo started out as a Kansas song set in Kansas, written by a Kansan, I didn't know if I was going to get out of the state alive. But I did. Anyway, let me kind of come to the conclusion here. Like Anna Bartman, Kansans, like Anna Bartman, we quietly do our duty. We downplay. We don't brag and boast. We're reticent. We don't draw attention to ourselves. We don't make a big fuss about things. We don't take big plunges and try to get rich quick. But we do hope to have our labors rewarded appropriately. But if not, we accept it and we keep on keeping on, working hard, doing our duty. And we know our detractors might not be able to hack it here, but we can. So we have a little bit of sense of superiority there, I think. As Kansans, we have a lot to be proud of. I'm thinking, for instance, of three major iconic symbols of America. The pioneer yeoman, Jeffersonian farmer. Think of those pioneers crossing Kansas, homesteading in Kansas, and those covered wagons taking out to 160 acres, getting their little plot of land and trying to make a go of it out there. The yeoman farmer, one of the symbols of America. And we can see that picture of that farmer, his family, and that covered wagon. The Indian. It's interesting. I taught a class also for years called The Indian in American Literature. And I'd always give the students a quiz at the first of every class. Name the first three Indian tribes that pop into your mind. Don't think, just write them down. Name the first three male Indians that pop into your mind. Don't think about it, just write them down. Then I started out asking for the names of three female Indians. I had to cut it back to two because the only ones I knew were Pocahontas and Sacagawea. But invariably, 70-80% of the tribes they named were Plains Indian tribes. When Columbus arrived, there were at least 500 different Native American ethnic groups, tribal groups in the country. From, birch bark canoes in the Northeast to big mud and wood pyramids in the South, poor people in the Great Basin living on insects, turning over rocks and eating grubs. Out on the West Coast, you had whale hunters taking those canoes out into the ocean, killing whales. You had in the Southwest, the Pueblos. I mean, all this wide variety of Native Americans and Native American lifestyles. But when asked to name an American Indian, 80-90% will always name either a Plains tribe or a tribe like the Cherokee that was moved onto the plains. Why? Because they were the last to be defeated. They were the last to engage the country's consciousness, and the newspaper articles about them were what at that time people remembered. And naming the male Indians, Sitting Bull every time, Crazy Horse every time, Geronimo every time, and then Chief Joseph, Black Hawk, maybe a few others. Maybe there'd be occasionally some name I didn't recognize because he was a personal friend of one of the students. But he or she, I got some women named that way too. But the point is, these were all the warriors, the men who resisted the most dramatically against this attempted white and successful white takeover of their land. They were the warriors, and at the time, of course, they were bitterly hated. But then Geronimo finally gives up, ascending Florida for a while. Then he comes back and he starts selling his photograph to tourists. Sitting Bull for a year joined the Wild Buffalo Bill Wild West show. Kind of sad to think of those free roaming people reduced to that. But the point is, the American Indian and Kansas is the Plains Indian. To the popular mind, the American Indian is the Plains Indian. And of course, we had them here in Kansas. The Osage, the Kansa, the Kiowa Apache, the Cheyenne, Southern Cheyenne, Comanche, and southwest Kansas. Sioux got down in the northern part of Kansas. The Plains Warrior is the American Indian. We contributed that. That's part of Kansas character, I think. And then finally, the cowboy. The cowboy is America's great folk hero. When back in the day, before Henry Kissinger was married, but while he was Secretary of State and had helped Nixon open China, Oriana Fallaci was her name. She's a very famous Italian journalist, famous for making her interview subjects say revealing things about themselves. And the thing that people remembered about the Henry Kissinger interview, remember this guy at the time, he's single, he's dating jet setters. He is, he described himself as a cowboy. He says, I'm like the cowboy that rides into town, faces off the bad guys and rides out at the sunset. In his German accent, this Harvard intellectual, this Jewish, he's all these things. How does he see himself? As a cowboy. That's a very powerful image. And without Kansas, the cowboy as we know him would never have come into existence. Drovers and herders had been taking care of livestock all over the world for centuries. It was only in the trail drives from Texas to Kansas after the Civil War that the cowboy emerged as a recognizable folk figure. So, all three of those have a strong Kansas connection. So, we are proud of that, but we don't boast about it. We don't like to call attention to ourselves. Consider our mountains. I'm not talking about Mount Sunflower, the highest point in Kansas, which is about as flat as that tabletop. I'm not talking about the Flint Hills, although I'm quite vocal in my praise of this last major extent of tallgrass prairie anywhere in the world. Those 5 million acres here, 1 million down in Oklahoma. It's the largest block of native tallgrass prairie left anywhere in the world. I'm proud of that. But I'm talking about real granite mountains, as rugged as the Front Range at Denver, the geologists tell me. They run from Winfield in Cowley County to Hiawatha in Brown County. But unlike our Colorado neighbors to the west, who extol their impressive 14,000-foot Rocky Mountain peaks, we don't brag about the Nemaha Mountains. That's because we keep them 800 feet underground. As I said, we don't like to boast. We're Kansans. Thank you. We have time for questions. I'll take a question or two if anyone has one. If not, we'll call it an evening.
Okay, there's food and refreshments downstairs.
Out in the hall. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.